This is Looks Good on Paper, a podcast from Willow about flipping the script on traditional hiring. I'm Anita Chohan, and every episode I put big voices in hiring and work culture through 3 quick-fire questions, speed dating style, to get the habits, trends, and ideas that matter. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this edition of the Looks Good on Paper podcast, powered by Willow. I'm so excited today to, first of all, we are now in our 3rd season, and I can't believe that we've made it this far. It's very exciting for me as someone who never thought that she would ever be a podcaster. But back to the task at hand, my guest today has spent over 20 years inside organizations during some of their most turbulent moments, and she's developed a pretty clear-eyed view of why transformation efforts succeed or fail. Spoiler, it's rarely the technology. Sachi Kittur is a future of work advisor, a seasoned people and culture executive, and the kind of voice that cuts through the noise when everybody else is chasing the next shiny tool. Sachi, thank you so much for being here today. I hope I did you justice, but if I missed anything...
I had some additional notes ready, but I think I'm going to cut and paste your intro. It's going to replace all my intros. Thank you.
Amazing.
It was perfect. It was perfect. Thank you.
So how did you get here? You've done so much.
Yeah. How did I get here? I think it's interesting. Very early in my career, my 20s, all the introspective we have. Who do we want to be when we grew up? I think I was a humanitarian at heart. And what's interesting is as I came into kind of, the HR profession, I kind of made it my mission to keep that human centric ethos alive in everything I did. So, bit of a broken record when I first started, where culture, people, CEOs weren't really talking about it. They were talking about top line numbers, and quite often all the really important data and messages that we see around business performance and connectivity to culture and people fell on deaf ears. So I've been pretty bold throughout my career. I've been very intentional about making sure I'm partnering with CEOs, I'm partnering with companies that understand that ethos, because I think that ethos is what fueled the success of many of the companies that I worked at, and so many companies that you and I know where culture is front and center.
Absolutely. And these types of companies that put that front and center, we see them thrive. We know that they do better, but it's so interesting how long it takes some people to get there. So thank you so much for that. And you know the drill. 3 rapid fire speed dating style questions and then 1 wild card at the end. So why don't we jump in? Okay. So Sachi, what's the biggest hiring mistake companies keep making, even though it's clearly not working?
Yeah, this is, I could have a laundry list for this, Anita, but I'm gonna double down on one word. I call it the credential trap. And it's not just in terms of education. It actually also includes, you should have worked in this industry. You should have had this many years in a similar role. And I think, we're seeing this. The data is telling this. The real signal isn't where someone worked, and it isn't where they graduated from and where they studied. It's how they think, learn, and collaborate inside a team. And so the term that I'm actually seeing percolate to the top, which I love, and I think we may touch on this in some of the other questions, is really around learning velocity. And I think that, to me, is what's most relevant today. And it doesn't even matter the level of position, whether you're C-suite, entry level. To me, the credential trap, we have to get past that. We're still falling into it. And we really need to double down on this notion of learning capability and curiosity.
Yeah, absolutely. I really love that. First of all, very soundbite. Amazing. Thank you. That was so good.
Good.
But at the same time, I just think some of the best people that I've even hired as a hiring manager in any marketing function that I've been in, they have the propensity to learn fast, even if they might not have X, Y, Z. I can see that hunger and desire when I'm interviewing them, and then to let them loose and actually do it. And you give them a better experience when they're able to also, satiate that need within them and also bring someone really good to the table that helps drive your business.
100%. Oh, so
Right?
powerful, so powerful. Yeah,
It's so
absolutely.
important. Well, I love that. Thank you so much. And I think, like, especially because of how many companies you've seen, you've probably seen, like, yeah, at every level, no matter the role. Even, like, I just think in, like, a C suite level or even VP level, how important that is, too. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. We tend to, and I think it's almost funny. I feel like at the C-suite level, um, I feel like our bar goes down a little bit generally because we're so caught up in the title that they had and the company that they worked at. And so I challenge companies to actually take that lens of scrutiny around, potential and learning and collaboration and all these. You have to apply it even more so, I'd say, at the C-suite level.
Big time. I also think like one of the biggest things that we talk about, Willow, and hopefully we switch over to more is this idea of skills-based hiring. I think that with
100%.
this idea of like learning velocity, we can actually see that in practice, right? So we use the skills-based hiring methodology to actually get through the screening process, but then giving them the space to actually go and learn and maybe even exemplify that in the interviewing screening process, but then actually give them the space to do that. Right. So on to question number 2. What's a hidden bias companies unknowingly have, even when they think that they're being progressive in their hiring?
I love this question because I talk about it all the time and it drives me nuts. Okay,
Yeah.
so ready for it? Companies say they value diversity, right? It's like a, word thrown around so much. I hear it all the time. I hear it from my leadership team. I hear it from hiring managers, but in action, they're still optimizing for comfort and familiarity. And I call this the pattern recognition bias. So again, leaders love to say, yeah, I want to hire for potential, but in reality, they're actually hiring for pattern recognition. And so if the last successful VP came from a certain company, came from a similar background, solved similar problems, all of a sudden you're starting to see that what you're saying around diversity is actually not what you're hiring for. That diversity sort of dichotomy, I'd say, in the hiring
Yeah.
practice, what we say versus what we do. So I think my view is that behavior is still happening, and that comfort and that bias, in my view, is disguised as strategy. It's actually not diversity.
Mm. And it's like, it's really interesting, right? Because we put ourselves kind of in a position when we act this way to never really change as a company or bring in hires
Yeah,
that will further our diversity.
yeah, it's true. It's so
Right? So
true.
we say we want diversity, but then we look for the same thing. We bring in the same person to
Yeah,
what? To maintain status quo?
yeah.
Or do you actually want to change your business and drive it to new outcomes?
Well, this is it, right? Everybody wants these things, but they're stuck in the how because the how is going to force them to do things differently. Nobody
Hmm.
likes change, right? No matter who you are. And so that requires being uncomfortable.
Absolutely. And I think like, that difference between like the size of the company too, where it's like, oh man, I can't even imagine a big company trying to change this type of habit
Totally.
and this
Totally.
bias,
Yeah.
right?
It's so,
And
so hard. So hard.
We had Cree Govinder from Microsoft on here as well. And what I admired about the way that he talked about the Microsoft ideology is like they really do trust every manager from top down to
Yes.
actually build from that way and actually affect change, but still give them this framework and a structure,
Yeah.
which I think could help curb some of that
It
bias
can.
too.
No, Microsoft does it so well. Because it's so rooted in trust and empowerment, I feel like they give enough, wide enough guardrails for hiring managers to bring their ethos and what they think and how they think they need to hire into the process. So it's pretty remarkable, actually, for a company as big as Microsoft.
Yeah.
They're a great example of a large company being able to still find creative ways to make sure that they don't fall into this trap.
Yeah, absolutely. I was really shocked when I learned it because I always have this idea that if the bigger you are, the less
Yeah,
likely you are to be able to be agile in those ways, especially
totally.
where it counts because humans are your best resource, the most important. All right. And on to one of my favorite questions. This is my bias. If you were to suddenly remove CVs from your current hiring process, what would that look
Yeah,
like?
yeah. So the funny thing is, even just yesterday, I had, I had a candidate, and that was referred over to me, and the natural thing is, hey, send me your resume. I've stopped asking for that. We've got enough data on the LinkedIn profile, and I think if you take away the CV, you actually force yourself to have a real conversation. And so to me, it's a very intentional conversation. Three things typically, um, that I would look at. Again, role agnostic, position agnostic, doesn't matter if you're C-suite, et cetera. I think there's, you need to assess real problem solving. So, when you're a growth company, if you're slow and steady growth,
Hmm.
it's a very different approach to problem solving, right? So you have to really be able to understand your culture, how you solve problems, and seeing if the
Hmm.
candidates are actually wired to kind of be able to learn and adapt in that environment. Not just what they know, but how quickly will they learn something new, right? And the pace of
Mm.
change that we're seeing. My prediction is, how everybody says, what's the superpower skill of the future?
Yeah.
I'm actually changing it. I used to say adaptability and pivoting, and yes, that's a big part of it, but I actually think
Yeah.
learning velocity, I'm changing my answer now. It's learning
I love
velocity.
it.
Yeah, that's going to be
It's
the future. And I think collaboration is the third one. Like, when I look back at the companies that I worked at, some of the best talent that had accelerated careers had one very common trait, and they were super easy to work with. And they kept information flowing throughout the organization. So to me, again, take away the CV and try to understand how they collaborate, how they connect.
I love that. Yeah, I think, it's so true. I obviously, everyone's been talking about AI. So like in this age where it's like, especially when it comes to hiring and all of these,
Yes.
like we're automating so much, and to what end really is my
Yes.
question. And then the second part of that is like how you augment that with the more human aspect of things. I think you hit it right on the nail, right?
I say 90% of conflict resolution, which is a big part of my role, is rooted in people who can't collaborate and communicate. Like if I got to the root of the issue of almost every single situation, it's actually
Yeah.
people who can't communicate and can't collaborate.
Also back to this idea about like, not everyone should be a manager, and like maybe you should be an IC, and the path up, up,
Yeah.
up, it doesn't always mean that you're going to be people manager, right? As
Yeah,
well.
it does because it's like your coach and player. You can be a great player on a team,
Mhm.
but doesn't mean you're going to be a good coach and vice versa. So yeah,
Absolutely
total,
not.
so important.
So I really love what you said about understanding the stage that your company's at and understand how your company actually works. So let's say you are a scale company. How would you replace the CV right now, other than just like, would it just be like understanding the needs of the company and then be able to mimic that throughout the process of the interview process to see if they can do that? What would
Yeah.
you suggest to companies at like a growth
I
stage
Yeah,
do?
if you're at a growth stage, I think I always say, like, depending on the function, right? There's different dynamics at play depending on the function and the role. But generally, I think if you answer this, I'd say this to all my hiring managers, you just need to answer one question for me before we start interviewing candidates and define for me what success looks like for this role in 6 months. Right. And in a growth company, it could mean, hey, we have three client, if it's sales role, we've got three enterprise clients under $1 million, right? It could be as specific as that. So I think really fast forwarding and taking the time to understand what success looks like for that role in 6 to 12 months. And then you reverse engineer. So if they're going to be successful, what are the qualities that we're going to look for?
Absolutely. I love that. Mike Bethley from Stack Adapt came on and talked about that. And I think that he said something so important that ties to exactly what you said. This idea that you have to actually understand your business goals, and it doesn't operate in isolation. So even if you're within this one
Yes,
area of the business, if you're not
exactly.
looking towards that number,
Exactly.
you're not going to find the right hire.
Yeah, no, no. The siloed hiring, decision making is a sort of a recipe for disaster. And that's why a lot of talent don't work out, right? You
Yeah.
interview them, you think they're great, you bring them in, but you did not bring in that sort of broader macro lens of the business and the needs, for
And I
sure.
think that like a growth dependent on what stage you are, of course, it really does matter, right? And you want to make sure someone stays with the time that you're spending on it. One of the biggest things that we're noticing right now
Yeah.
in trends, and you're probably noticing it as well, is like there's a decrease in confidence in hiring due to the number of things like fake applicants, using AI, things like that. So if I were to ask you as a professional here, how would a hiring manager or a company increase confidence in hiring over the next year? What would you say?
Yeah. It's a really interesting question. I think it's a couple of things. One, I think because of the supply demand equation right now in the talent marketplace, I'd say, hiring managers love to do postings and just passively look at candidates coming into their inbox. I would say your job as a hiring manager, if you want to hire the best person, go out to your network and start having conversations around talent. That to me is the low-hanging fruit that very few hiring managers take advantage of, because they're like, oh, I'm busy and I don't have time. Well, you have to make the time, because it's going to be very costly if you don't hire the right
Agreed.
person. So leveraging your network putting over-indexing your time and energy in recruitment via your network. So that's one thing. And then I'd say the second thing is pick up the phone and have a conversation as a part of your first interview. Like, you don't even need HR. Like, so I'm a, to me, HR can be a bit of an added litmus test towards the end, but I quite often tell hiring managers to just pick up the phone. If you see somebody, go have a conversation with them.
Oh, yeah.
And sometimes phone calls, believe it or not, are better than even like a formal video call. That's how I used to recruit back in the day.
Yeah.
I'd pick up the phone and call. And to me, like, there's just something about that old school conversation that still works.
Absolutely. I mean, just going back to what you said earlier about like, collaboration and stuff, I think these are soft skills. And I feel like we're pushing over to that way more and more. And maybe in
Yes.
response, maybe without us realizing that because of AI and this idea that we have to kind of over-index now in this way. But I
Yeah.
think for good reason. I think it's actually going to turn out really well. We're going to get back to the humanness of the work.
If I had to predict the future with my very, with my humble lens, I would say the companies that are actually going to thrive and stay relevant are the ones that are going to be more intentional about human connectivity in the workplace. So the culture playbook of HR running programs and initiatives is no longer going to work in this tech. It's going to have to be very intentional. I think every single leader in the organization is going to have to show up with sort of a very human-centric focus and lens, asking teams, how are you? How are things going? It's not just about work. It's not. So that is where the human connectivity is, because it's such a big risk. Like, I don't want to sound alarm bells, but I think it's it's the biggest business risk I'm seeing today.
Yeah.
I think if you want to get ahead of that curve, start thinking that way now. And it's going to be so, so critical to the future.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for joining me today. This was amazing.
Yay, we
and
did it! After,
we did it.
I know. We won't get into the technical nuances that we had, but yes, we finally did it. And
We
Anita,
made it
you
work.
are such a, you bring so much incredible energy. You're so clearly passionate about this world of sort of talent and how are we connecting and how are we hiring. And I just want to say thank you for being a voice out there, because I think this is needed more than ever today.
Oh, thank you so much. And
Yeah.
I'm so excited to share with the world your ideas and thoughts. And
Yes, thank you.
yes, thank you everyone for tuning in, and stay tuned for our next episodes. And I'll see you next week on Looks Good on Paper. Thanks for joining me on Looks Good on Paper, powered by Willow. If today's 3-question sprint gave you something new to think about, hit subscribe and share with your network, because in hiring, and really in life, it's never just about what looks good on paper.